Something is quietly changing among Gen Z, especially young men, but also some women as well. In 2026, we want this, not this. We want this, not this. We want this, not this. Because at some point, we collectively realized that many aspects of modern life are genuinely insane. We now live in a world where selling your body online is considered empowering, where getting blackout drunk and doing hookups every weekend is considered normal socialization, where scrolling on a tiny screen for 6 or 7 hours a day is just how things are, where taking half a pharmacy's worth of pills is considered therapy, and where men, for example, who want a traditional family and a wife who hasn't had hundreds of sexual partners, is somehow considered misogynistic or right wing. Sometimes it truly feels like we live in an upside down world. And if we're being honest about it, does any of this actually make people happier? Does it make society more functional, more stable? And Gen Z is different because we grew up fully inside this environment. We didn't read about it in textbooks, we didn't inherit it halfway. We lived these experiences. This is the exact kind of world that shaped us. And nowadays, more and more of us, as we're growing up and becoming more mature and entering our early and late 20s, we're starting to come to the same conclusions. That something about modern life nowadays feels hollow and degrading. And what actually gives me hope is that I know a lot of us are actually ready to make a change now, even if it means on an individual level, if we can't change society at large. So the point of this video is very simple. I want to talk about 3 areas of culture and society that people are starting to push back against. Like I mentioned earlier, we now live in a world, like it or not, where selling your body online to strangers is framed as empowerment and entrepreneurship. You've heard about the stories about how a lot of girls, when they turn 18, the first thing they do is start an OnlyFans. And that's not even necessarily to blame them or mock them. It's just a really sad reflection of the way things have gotten. Because the worst part is the people who enable this. The grown adults in the room who will look you in the eye and tell you that not only is this fine, but that it's also healthy or progressive. And as a result, there are now entire industries dedicated to monetizing and exploiting loneliness, insecurity, sexual impulses. And instead of asking whether this is good or healthy for society at large, the conversation just gets shut down with buzzwords like choice, freedom, sex positivity, things that sound progressive in name, but are really leading to the regression of society. And if you, as a guy, for example, just point out that this kind of thing is degrading, that it damages relationships, you're immediately told that you're judgmental, that you're controlling, that you hate women or you're just insecure, even though many women nowadays agree with us too. And it's just a full-scale gaslighting campaign by the progressive cultural left. And this kind of thing trickles down into modern feminism as well. That's why one of the biggest things that many people, and especially Gen Z, are rejecting nowadays is the perversion of what modern feminism has turned into. It's not anymore about equality, about fairness, about basic human rights. We've already agreed on that stuff long ago. What people are reacting to and railing against is this insane modern version of feminism that celebrates sexual chaos, complete degeneracy, and pure, unfettered resentment towards men as a whole, as a concept. Especially straight white men, by the way, when you bring in that whole intersectionality woke stuff. Because somewhere along the line, society en masse just got gaslit, essentially. Hyper-promiscuity stopped being seen as a bad thing, but rather as something to celebrate or even brag about. Modesty and virtues, instead of being seen as something good to aspire to, became known as internalized oppression. And for example, being a stay-at-home mom instead of an independent boss babe was looked down upon. Long-term commitment no longer became the end goal, and instead, being in a relationship was seen as somehow a bad thing or a loss of freedom. And many women were taught, like, oh, you don't want to be tied down to no man. You want to have fun in your 20s. You want to explore. You want to, you know, you've all heard the I'm not looking for commitment right now thing. And it's just become so common now. And on the other hand, if a guy, for example, says that we'd prefer not to have a woman that's literally slept with half the city, we're oftentimes treated as if we're the villains for that, for having our own standards. We'll be labeled as controlling, misogynistic, or right wing. So you see all these problems with hyperfeminism and sexual degeneracy, and people are starting to catch on. Because it's not just men raising these concerns anymore. More and more women in today's world are now saying the same thing and starting to push back too. And I'm glad. Because they're realizing that this culture doesn't necessarily benefit them either. At least not in the long term, even if it may bring some short term indulgence. Because this radically progressive sexual culture, it didn't lead to better relationships, it didn't lead to happier lives, it didn't lead to more respect among people, it didn't lead to men and women even getting along. If you look at literally all of the measurables, relationships are down, birth rates are down, men and women are more polarized than ever, and no one wants to live in that kind of world. So at some point, people stop caring about the nice sounding slogans of women's empowerment and you go girl. Because again, when you look at the actual results of this culture, for both genders, men and women, it becomes obvious why more and more people are rejecting it and returning to what you might call traditionalism. Another major area that's been a unique problem of our generation is how normal it's become to chemically cope with life. What I mean, for example, is how drinking every weekend is not treated as a bad habit anymore. It's treated like a basic prerequisite to social life. Same thing with smoking the grass. It's become a daily habit for a lot of people, especially those who claim that they need it to, relax. Even things like nicotine made a comeback, just in a different form, because people just need endless stimulation now. So overall, what I mean is that we have an entire culture dedicated to numbing yourself. And I don't even just mean the obvious hard substances. Just look at it from the medical side of things. Being on multiple prescriptions before the age of 25 is now self-care. And basically, every discomfort becomes a diagnosis. Every little anxiety is labeled as a disorder, and any dissatisfaction with life gets treated as some kind of, chemical imbalance. Which it is, by the way, I'm not saying that it's not. But what's clearly wrong is that the default response to this kind of stuff has just turned into throw a bottle of pills at the problem, instead of asking the real questions and getting to the core of why people feel empty or unfulfilled or anxious. And guess who profits off of this? Surprise, surprise, Big Pharma. They profit directly from a population that always stays dependent on them because they never address the root causes of the issues. Instead, they just try to take something artificial to make it go away. Quick interruption, if you're enjoying the video and you'd like to get more involved with the channel, there are two ways to do that. Patreon is our all-in-one community, so much behind-the-scenes stuff on there. Channel memberships is for bonus content, plus that badge by your name in the comments. So if you're interested, links are in the description. Big shout out to everyone who's already a part of the community. And check out the second channel, by the way, if you're interested in outdoor stuff. Now back to the video. And of course, this isn't an argument to say that every medication or that every substance is bad. And when I talk about the concept of traditionalism, it's not about rejecting modern medicine. It's just an observation that when an entire generation can't function now without chemical assistance, it has to mean that something is broken. So why don't we try to fix it? And part of the way to fix it might just be returning to some tried and true ideals of the past, where we didn't always have the instinctive response to view every psychological challenge as something to immediately eliminate or make go away. Now, I'm not one of those masculinity gurus, but in some cases, it really is just about sucking it up, toughing it out, and just being strong and unfazed by the chaos around you. And there's something appealing about that to young men, like that whole stoic idea. And of course, in the past, from a more traditional viewpoint, if we ever did need to seek out solutions or remedies outside of ourselves, they usually came in a more natural and more wholesome form. And there's something that just feels right about that. Things like sunlight and just spending time outdoors, breathing in the fresh air, doing physical exercise, finding meaning in real life friendships and even relationships. Maybe the cure is actually to immerse yourself fully in reality rather than to escape it. And speaking of escapism, social media. It's another area of modern life that we took for granted for a while, but now more and more people are starting to try to reject or at least limit. Because social media is having a huge impact on the way we act, the way we think, the way we treat each other. The algorithms have successfully hijacked our minds. And not only because they're so distracting and so addictive, although that's definitely part of it, but because it fundamentally rewired human behavior that just isn't healthy. For example, it's turned life into a performance, even me talking into this camera. Although I obviously try my best to be authentic, it's of course impossible to be fully myself on camera, and as anyone who knows me in real life would know, I'm very different in person than on the screen. And even though I might be a more extreme example of this since I have to do YouTube for a living, everyone's experiencing this, social media performance anxiety to one extent or the other. Instead of doing things and asking, is this good for me? People now subconsciously ask, how does this look to others? How does this look on Instagram? If you really think about it, so much of our time is now dedicated to either presenting ourselves online or watching others present themselves online. And again, something that's even a bit personal to me. You know how I like to go hiking and spend time outdoors, and by the way, I have a second channel for that? But sometimes, even in these most peaceful moments of my life, I still get caught up in the social media game. Like, I'll be out in the mountains or on a beautiful trail, and I'll sometimes just catch myself distracted and thinking about, like, oh, what's the best shot for an Instagram post, or taking way too many pictures just to find the right one. Now, another danger of social media is how constant exposure to curated lives destroys perspective. Because everyone is constantly posting and putting out there the absolute best visuals of themselves, even if it doesn't reflect their true reality, including the richest people in the world, the best looking people in the world, the most successful people in the world in their fields. So when you, as an average person, sees this stuff on the daily or possibly even on the hourly, it oftentimes could make you feel behind or make you feel inadequate. And even aside from all this, maybe the biggest thing is the absolute attention span apocalypse that social media has brought about. And Gen Z understands this better than anyone else because we grew up inside of it. We weren't introduced to social media as adults or later on in life. From the very start, our brains were developing alongside algorithms designed to hijack our attention span. And the result is an entire generation raised on TikTok that struggles with basic focus and presence. And if it wasn't bad enough for us, I've heard horror stories, absolute horror stories about Gen Alpha and how they're completely cooked. Like, most kids in elementary school don't even know how to read anymore, apparently. And I've seen videos where a teacher in a classroom literally has to have a split screen of Subway Surfers on one half and the actual lesson on the other half, just to get the kids to not get distracted. Then I've heard about teachers saying that kids just randomly scream 6-7 in the middle of lessons. Oh man. But yeah, this is only the natural symptom of an environment that was engineered to keep people addicted and distracted. But now, like I said, I feel like things are starting to change and more people are pulling back, deleting apps, limiting screen time, spending more time offline, or at least trying to, and just overall rebuilding the ability to be present and even be bored at times if necessary. Because maybe boredom isn't the enemy, unlimited stimulation is. And I think Gen Z realized this at some point. When you look at this all together, it makes perfect sense why this idea of traditionalism is coming back. Not even necessarily as some kind of organized movement or some ideology, but simply as a reaction to what we saw was wrong with the world. Almost like a natural immune response, and obviously that's a good thing. Because we noticed that these same patterns were appearing across all aspects of our culture. Radical feminism and the sexual revolution didn't lead to better relationship outcomes. Chemical coping through substances and medications didn't lead to mental stability. In fact, it made things worse. And unlimited stimulation and comparison through social media didn't make people any happier or any less insecure. And the results in totality: more anxiety, more emptiness, more loneliness, and just more confusion too about where our lives are going and where the world is headed. So this overarching idea of traditionalism is kind of just saying like, let's take a step back for a second before we plow into the future at 1,000 miles per hour without knowing what we're actually doing. And now Gen Z, of course, isn't rejecting modern life entirely. Again, we're just reacting to the fact that many aspects of modern life, when taken to their extremes, stop serving basic human needs. Traditionalism, as I speak of it, is less about going back in time and more about reclaiming the things that clearly worked. Genuine relationships instead of sexual degeneracy, natural health instead of substances and medications, real community instead of social media and the online world. And these aren't crazy or drastic measures. That's why this overall culture shift feels quiet but real. And I don't think I'm the only one who feels it. It's individuals making changes in how they live, including myself and many people across my generation, and even, of course, in other generations as well. Not because someone told us to, but because we were raised on the alternative and realized that it wasn't working. That's why I say that Gen Z is embracing traditionalism, and not out of nostalgia for a time period that never existed for us, but out of a response to our own very lived experiences.